Hello, my name is Stephen Engelhardt. I'm the Executive Director of Adirondack Architectural Heritage, the nonprofit historic preservation organization for the Adirondack Park. And today we are at a place called Debar Pond Lodge on the shores of Debar Pond in the town of Duane in Franklin County. And we're here for one primary purpose today, and that is because last week the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation announced its intention to demolish this building, which is listed on the National Register of Historic Places. And so we wanted to take this opportunity to tell you a little bit about the architecture, the history of the site, what some of the possibilities are for this property in state ownership, and what would be a more responsible way to go about figuring that out. So like just about every piece of property in the Adirondacks, this one too has a long history that of course goes all the way back to when Native Americans roamed and used the lakes and mountains and streams all around us. And this was used by guides and trappers and woodsmen for hunting and logging through most of the 19th century. And then along comes a guy named Robert Schroeder, who is a brewer and a hops baron, and he comes here in about 1880, and he falls in love with this place. He thinks that it has potential for hop growing, and he begins the cultivation of 300 acres of hops, builds a huge castle, and has a huge presence here. None of that has any kind of economic success. Eventually he squanders his own fortune, his wife's fortune, and they both die prematurely in Brooklyn in the early 20th century. And eventually the property is bought by Arthur and Claire Wheeler from Palm Beach, Florida in 1939. And by the time they acquire the property, I think about 1,200 acres, the castle that Robert Schroeder had built was in horrible condition. And so they tore it down, and they hired the Saranac Lake architect William Bill Diston to design the cottage, the lodge that we see behind us, a 17-room building built out of cedar logs. And by the time that they hired Bill Diston to design this, he was already an extremely well-known architect in the Adirondacks. He had trained with William L. Coulter, the first professionally trained resident architect of the Adirondacks. Coulter dies in 1907. Diston, who had worked for him as a draftsman, goes to Columbia, gets an architecture degree, and eventually assumes the practice. And during Diston's 70 years of practicing architecture in the Adirondacks, he designs places like St. John's of the Wilderness Church near Paul Smith's, Camp Winundra, now called The Point, on upper Saranac Lake, Minnow Brook, and lots of other really well-known, beautiful buildings and complexes in the Adirondacks. And so the Wheelers hire him in 1939 to build this camp, and we think that the very prolific building general contracting firm of Branch and Callanan, also from Saranac Lake, were the builders here. So as we come around the back side of the main lodge, we can see some of the other aspects and attributes of the camp that make it a great camp, or at least make it the kind of great camps that were being built in the middle of the 20th century. There isn't the same level of self-sufficiency that you would see at places like Camp Sagamore or Camp Santanoni, but still this was a relatively remote location, and so the Wheelers planned for that and planned and built other buildings to support their sort of full life here. And so there were gardens, and associated with the gardens is a small greenhouse. There was a garage, there were stables, there were sheds, there were wood houses, wood sheds, and all of this collectively added up to supported the kind of life that the Wheelers enjoyed here for a couple of decades. We don't really know much about the people who supported their life here, but if it was anything like the staffs that were associated with other large camps in the Adirondacks, surely there would have been caretakers and people that helped with the gardens and the horses, and to make life here possible for the Wheelers and their family. So from about 1959 to 1979, the camp was owned by someone named Farwell Perry from Connecticut. And one of the ways that people remember him is that he was a pilot, and he would come and go from here on a seaplane. And in 1979, he sold the property, 1,200 acres in all, to New York State. And but he had previously leased an area around the lodge to a private individual who had a 25-year lease on it. And that owner continued to use the camp and took very good care of it. In 2004, that lease expired, and it went fully into state ownership. Knowing that the camp was coming into full state ownership, Adirondack Architectural Heritage began to build public support for its preservation and public use. And we've done a number of things to build that support. We have worked closely with the town of Duane, who has a tremendous interest in seeing something happen here that brings people into the town, that enhances the outdoor recreational opportunities here, that becomes an attraction for the town, much the same way that Camp Santanoni is an attraction in the town of Newcomb. We've also worked with the hundreds of people that have come here since it's been in state ownership, who have come to this 1,100-acre Debar pond and seen what a marvelous camp and the setting it has, who have wondered about how might we best use this in the future. We also were responsible for getting Debar Pond Lodge listed on the National Register of Historic Places. This elevates its stature and allows the state to consider it in different ways because of its nature as a historic site. We have also drafted what we call a white paper on the future uses of Debar Pond Lodge and its preservation, and these, we think, could be the basis for a really informed conversation with DEC and other stakeholders about the future of the property. Unfortunately, the department has taken to just announcing its intention to demolish the camp, and we think that this is hasty, ill-considered, and a bad decision. And instead, what we're encouraging the department to do is to convene the stakeholders who are interested in Debar Pond Lodge, bring us together, and have a long, serious, open-minded discussion about what the possibilities are. And even if some of those possibilities involve complex planning, involve even constitutional amendments, we should be having those discussions in a broad public setting, and that does not appear to be happening. That's the main thing we're advocating for. We, of course, believe in the preservation and continued use of the building. We think DEC has the responsibility under the New York State Historic Preservation Act and under certain aspects of environmental conservation law to explore all reasonable alternatives to its demolition, and so we're encouraging the department to do that, and we stand ready, as do many other people and organizations, to have that discussion. Bring us together, get it out all on the table, and let's see where we land in the end. That's really the only way to do that. And that's what happened regarding the future of Camp Santanoni. The department convened a Camp Santanoni Citizens Advisory Committee. These were people that represented lots of different interests, including environmental groups in the town of Newcomb and groups like Adirondack Architectural Heritage. We didn't agree on everything, but we agreed on a lot of things, and bringing us together allowed us to have that discussion and come to a decision that everybody, I think, could live with and buy into in the end. And that's what we're asking for here.